Welcome to the 2022 Flathead Wild and Scenic River webinar series. My name is Sheena Pate, and I'm the watershed coordinator for the Flathead Rivers Alliance. The Flathead Rivers Alliance was formed in 2019. Some of you may have been a part of it in the initial phase of it. We're officially designated as a nonprofit in 2020, and I came on as staff in 2021 to launch the River Ambassador program. We've hit the ground running and really looking forward to sharing this webinar series. It's the first we've done, and this is part 2 in a 2-part series. So with that, we are focused on the Three Forks of the Flathead Wild and Scenic River. Some of you may know that the Flathead Wild and Scenic River is what inspired the National Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And we'll dive a little bit into that during the presentation with our guest speakers. I do want to recognize that the river system flows through the traditional homelands of the Kootenai, the Ktunaxa, Salish, and Blackfeet peoples, and it's been called many names. And we refer to it as the Three Forks of the Flathead for this presentation. We are dedicated to the 3 key initiatives with Flathead Rivers Alliance as far as education, stewardship, and community, and really looking to support and enhance the outstanding, remarkable values of the Three Forks. So for this presentation, we are going to dive into comprehensive river management plans. So sort of a CRMP 101. If you're a part of the national CRMP planning public meetings, this is kind of a recap of things that have happened, but also if you're new, this is a really great foundation information as far as what is a CRMP, a comprehensive river management plan, and how does management of a wild and scenic river work. We have 4 amazing presenters today. We have Jimmy Gaudry, he's the Wilderness and Wild and Scenic River Program Manager with the Forest Service, the Northern Region. We have Chris Prue, Recreation, Wilderness, Wild and Scenic River, Trails and Rec Special Uses Program Manager with the Flathead National Forest, and MJ Crandall with Flathead National Forest. He's the District Recreation Lead with the Hungry Horse Glacier View Ranger District. And we have Brad Blickhand from the Wilderness and Wild and Scenic River Coordinator Program with Glacier National Park. So what we'll do is I will start with our first presenter and we will go through. There will be a point that we will open it up to Q&A, and then Chris will come on and give us some updates on what's happening with the Three Forks of the Flathead CRMP and how you can participate in the public participation phase. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Jimmy.
Hey, thank you, Sheena. Hey, you can move into my first slide. I want to start off though by acknowledging this partnership. Having the Flathead Rivers Alliance and the staff on the Forest of the Flathead come together and form this partnership is a great thing for the river system. It's a shared stewardship model for managing wild and scenic rivers. For me, for the Northern Region, it's the only wild and scenic river focused partnership in the Northern Region that I'm aware of. And so it's a great start to what could potentially be more, but from my perspective, we just do so much more when we're working together like this. So thanks, Sheena, and thanks to the FRA folks for what you're doing. I want to start off just by sharing my perspective. I do work in the regional office for the Forest Service out of the Northern Region. You can see the map here that shows our landscape, which is Montana, North Dakota, part of South Dakota, and a little sliver of Washington and Idaho, part of Idaho. And within that map, you can see the rivers that are highlighted. Those are designated wild and scenic rivers. And so we're responsible for 7 designated wild and scenic rivers covering around 500 miles total. You'll also see the Missouri River on this map. Noted, it is a designated wild and scenic river in Montana, but that is managed by the Bureau of Land Management. But in addition to these rivers, we have over 90 study rivers, totaling almost 2,000 miles. And a study river is a river that we've determined through a process, usually a study, obviously, to be either eligible or suitable for Wild and Scenic River designation. And so with that, in my mind, we always have the potential to add another 2,000 miles in 90 plus rivers to the system. In addition to, I know some of you out there are from NGOs that support additional designations. We know there are bills out there that potentially could pass at any time, which would also add mileage and rivers to the system. So anyway, just wanted to highlight that's my perspective tonight. That's what I'm bringing to the discussion, and happy to be here. So with that, if you want to move to the next slide. So what does it mean to manage a wild and scenic river? I'm going to rely heavily on the direction we get from the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act itself. I'm not going to hit on everything it takes, but I would like to cover kind of the highlights from the act, and what we tend to focus on is the big things we need to make sure we do. So what happens when Wild and Scenic River is designated? Once a river is designated, its water quality, free-flowing condition, and outstandingly remarkable values must be protected and enhanced in perpetuity. And these three things together are what we often call river values. And if you click on the slide, it'll show the term river values. I want to be careful, I'm going to talk about outstandingly remarkable values tonight, but to differentiate, when we talk about river values, we're talking about water quality, free-flowing condition, and ORVs. ORVs are one of those river values, but three things that we keep in mind. I'm going to hit on each of these in some detail so that we're familiar with what they are. So first, water quality is one of the primary values identified for protection in the Act. Section 1B gives us direction on protecting water quality. It's important to note that a river doesn't need to have the highest water quality to qualify as a wild and scenic river, just as long as the water quality can be protected or improved. Here's some fun water notes from the Forest Service to keep in mind. The Forest Service manages the largest single source of water in the United States. More than 60 million Americans rely on drinking water that originated on the national forest or a national grassland. And here's a good one. 1 out of 10 people can trace their drinking water source back to a designated wild and scenic river. One last fun fact, the picture, and I do just have a variety of pictures throughout this from the region, but this is Sunshine, the Flathead Rivers Alliance intern that I think started a few months back, helping with water quality monitoring on the Flathead. All right, we can go to the next slide. So free-flowing condition, that's one of the river values I referred to before, and it's identified for protection, and we need to understand what's considered free-flowing if we're going to manage for that in a wild and scenic river system. Again, referring back to the Act, Section 16D is where we see the language referring to free-flowing, and a part of that is in this slide, but I want to read the whole thing to you. So how it reads is as applied to any river or section of river, this means existing or flowing in a natural condition without impoundment, diversion, straightening, riprapping, or other modification of the waterway. The existence, however, of low dams, diversion works, and other minor structures at the time any river is proposed for inclusion in the National Wild and Scenic River System shall not automatically bar its consideration for such inclusion. And then it goes on to say, provided that this shall not be construed to authorize, intend, or encourage future construction of such structures within components of the national system. So I just wanted to highlight that because we have examples in the northern region. This photo is actually from East Rosebud Creek, which was designated in 2018 on the Custer-Gallatin National Forest. And you all have an example where you're at in the South Fork of the Flathead. Both of those actually have impoundments on them, right? There are reservoirs in both of these waterways. In this instance, what happened is for both of these is when the designation went through, it didn't include that section of the river, which actually had the impoundment. But I think it's important to realize that there's a gradient here, that we may see some things when a river is designated. There may be some low dams or some diversions that exist. And those situations often provide interesting challenges for us as managers. And then something worth noting, that anytime any work is proposed within the bed and banks of a wild and scenic river, because of this free-flowing requirement, we have to analyze that and assure that whatever that work is, the free-flowing condition of the river continues to be protected and enhanced. Okay, we can move to the next slide. So, outstanding or remarkable values, or we commonly call these ORVs. And the Act, again, gives us pretty clear language on what those ORVs can be. You see the list here. Along with the list, we have language that helps us decide whether or not a river actually contains a scenic ORV or a recreation or a geologic or fish, or you can move down the list and see that there's specific language that we use to determine whether or not that applies. And then the last category on here, I would define as kind of a catch-all. And there are a variety of other things, other similar values that have been used to decide on an ORV for a river. And to be clear, a river only needs one of these to hit the mark for designation. And so some of the examples that we've seen in this last column, similar values are, for example, botany, hydrology, or paleontology have been used in other river systems. We can move to the next slide. So I wanted to hit on a couple other statutory requirements, and I think that'll help us lead into more of the discussion for tonight, obviously, but two of them in particular. So once a river is designated, from the time of designation, we have a quarter-mile corridor on either side of the river. That is like the standing, like here is the designated river corridor. The agency who manages the river is given a year to further define what that river corridor is. And through this process, which is a public process, we're allowed to kind of navigate, move that boundary closer or further from the riverbanks, as long as we maintain a final boundary of no more than 320 acres per river mile. So the idea is to keep that quarter mile, but we can move it. And the reasons that we would decide to do that is if there's something that connects to the river values that we want to make sure is encompassed in that boundary and protected, it gives us the flexibility to do that at that time. The other thing it directs us to do is to develop a comprehensive river management plan within 3 fiscal years of designation. And so I want to just reiterate that both of these, language in the Act, require these to be public processes. And this is not just a requirement, though. It's also an opportunity for us to engage community members and interest groups and landowners and how the river is going to be managed from that point forward. So I'd like to dive a little bit into what goes into a management plan. I think some of you may be very familiar with this, but it's worth just bringing up. And again, all derived from the Wild and Scenic River Act itself. It directs us to include sections that cover these areas, and it should be no surprise that the river values are encompassed in here as well. And so we need to address ORVs, land and facility development, water quality and in-stream flow, user capacities, any regulatory authorities that exist on the river, and then a monitoring plan. It provides monitoring commitments to the public that are made through the CRMP, and the line officer and staff are aware of these commitments, as well as the public when we move forward. And lastly, not here locally, but we're starting to see some of our newer CRMPs also take a shot at thinking about what climate change means for rivers and trying to address that in their management plans as well. All right, well, so this is a pretty cursory overview. This is, I think we typically do a 2 or 3 day course on the management of wild and scenic rivers. And I think we just covered it in 10 or 15 minutes or so here. So I just wanted to highlight a few resources that are available. And I think Sheena's gonna share the links to these when she posts the webinar later. But there is an interagency Wild and Scenic River Coordinating Council, which has representatives from all 4 federal land management agencies. And they maintain a site called rivers.gov. Anything you want to find out about wild and scenic rivers, I think you can start with rivers.gov and find it there. There's also more and more training becoming available in the virtual world. I think for us, training has kind of exploded and is available in all kinds of ways, but a few places to go for that is there's a Wild and Scenic River training module online that has been established by the Bureau of Land Management, and you can select different modules that you might be interested in. If you even just Google Wild and Scenic River Training BLM, it'll take you to the site. It's free. You can pay and get credits, but it's a great way to learn more about the nuts and bolts of Wild and Scenic River management. The River Management Society is a national partner with the Forest Service and the other land management agencies. Sorry, Brad, I keep just going to the Forest Service, but and they actually have a river training center that was started maybe, I want to say in 2018, the 50th anniversary of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And they are bringing more and more Wild and Scenic River training online almost every month, most of it virtual, but we hosted a training through them actually in Whitefish back in 2018 for Forest Service and Park Service staff at that time. And then I left something off the list here, but it's something that I've been involved with for the last few years in the National Wilderness Skills Institute, which was a completely online virtual training focused on wilderness and wild and scenic rivers that we did last May. We are also going to do that again this May. And it has an entire track set up mostly for field going staff that work for either an agency or a partner, but it's a great way to up your wild and scenic river knowledge if you want to pursue that further. And then I just want to wrap it up here. I think I have one more slide, and again, say thanks for inviting me to attend this. I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to conversations later. And I want to pass it to Brad from Glacier National Park now.
All right, thanks, Jimmy, and welcome everyone. I just want to say thank you all for attending. You know, I've worked in Glacier in and around since 1987, and for the Park Service since 92 and 1992. And well, I helped manage this resource, incredible resource, with my colleagues here. I'm just a caretaker, and you folks are the owners, and we really can't manage correctly or protect this for future generations without your help. So it really shows a lot that you take some time tonight to actually listen to us and to learn a little bit more about the Wild and Scenic River here and be involved. So anyway, I'm going to get into uniqueness of the Three Forks of the Flathead and the challenges of co-management. And, you know, having worked around the park and the forest for a long time, you kind of take it for granted. But the fact is, this river is really unique. A lot of wild and scenic rivers end up flowing from one jurisdiction to another. And so each jurisdiction kind of can put its stamp on the management around that corridor. But we have the forest and the park, basically, at least the 100 some miles or so around Glacier Park, is managed jointly by the forest on one side and the Park Service on the other side. And we have two different management strategies or mandates from Congress. So you can imagine that could be quite a challenge, and it makes for some unique, I think, situations and some conversation, but it also opens us up for some really cool opportunities too. If you look at it correctly, you can do certain things on the forest side that you can't necessarily do on the park, but you can also have different experiences in the park or the forest. So I think depending on how you want to look at it, it's a pretty unique system that we're very lucky to have with those challenges. So again, 101 miles of the shared corridors, roughly a quarter mile on either side of the river, are where the Flathead National Forest is primarily on both sides. So about 100 miles is where we manage it cooperatively, and 118 miles is where the Flathead solely manages the Wild and Scenic River of the Three Forks of the Flathead. Just kind of perspective, there's 15,600 acres Wild and Scenic River are managed by the National Park Service as far as the corridor goes. The Flathead manages close to 50,000 acres total, of which about, I think about 12,000 is near Glacier Park. And of those acres, there's also 5,500 acres that are state or private land around the park. So lots of different jurisdictions and private land. So we have some challenges in ownership, but also opportunities. Just an example here is the North Fork Scenic Stretch along the park. So that's the upper North Fork. 5% of that Glacier manages as a wilderness and as a wilderness threshold zone. We have recommended wilderness in the park. Congress is the only entity that can actually create wilderness, but through legislation, but we manage it in such a way as it's wilderness until Congress makes, by policy, until Congress makes its decision. So obviously that makes it for a little different management style than what happens on the forest, but most of your access to the Flathead comes from the Forest Service side. The recreational stretch along the park, which is basically south of the Camas Bridge, is about 47% recommended wilderness in Glacier Park side. And then along the Middle Fork, about 35% of our side of the river is managed as recommended wilderness. So again, you know, the National Park Service has a little different management approach, and in the North Fork, we manage for more of a rustic and solitude experience, and the forest manages more for a multiple use approach. So both of those approaches actually give the unique opportunities. You can go from a pretty heavily whitewater, lots of people stretch, but real easy to get on, to all the way to wilderness, and you have to fly or take a horse to get in certain stretches. So the amount of opportunities on this river system is amazing. You can go to the next slide there, Sheena. So, and I've said some of the differences, but just to highlight a few, very few places you can launch in Glacier Park, but most of the launches are on the forest side on all these stretches near the park. We require permits to camp on our side of the park if you're in the North Fork, not in the Middle Fork, because below the high water mark is actually outside the park on our side of the river. We manage more in those areas where we actually have our recommended wilderness. We actually try to manage for solitude and trying to preserve wilderness character. Whereas the forest has more of that multiple use strategy on most of their stretches along the park. Now they have obviously wilderness in the Bob Marshall areas for the South Fork and the Middle Fork. We don't allow hunting on our side of the river, but there's some pretty good hunting on the forest side. Fire pans are only for all reaches on the National Park Service side are required. We don't really want pets out of the boats in the park side, trying to protect our wildlife, but your pet is welcome to be out of a boat on the Forest Service side. We don't have any drive-in camping, but you can do that quite easily in certain areas along the Forest Service side. The one part I really like is that the Forest Service side is the lead agency. So they have to do a lot of the reporting requirements and the paperwork. So that makes it so that we as a Forest or the Park Service they consult with us, but we don't have to actually do the paperwork. Some of the things that are very similar though, is we try to reduce and make sure people have proper disposal of human waste. Food storage regulations are similar in that you have to store your food to keep away from grizzly bears. We encourage leave no trace practices, and the ORVs are still the same. We're both managing to protect those ORVs. Sheena, you can go to the next slide. So just some of the things we do cooperatively is the forest puts on an annual river ranger training that Park Service and Forest Service rangers attend, and sometimes volunteers. We jointly monitor river conditions and encounter visitor encounter data along the river, and the Forest Service collates all that data for us. As Jimmy talked it earlier, we had an interagency Wild and Scenic River training workshop. We conducted an outstandingly remarkable values workshop, which I attended in 2012, which was a really unique experience for someone to do in their career. I was really excited and still proud of the work we did from that. We do river cleanups together. We both attend regular meetings. Sheena keeps us pretty on track and she's a busy gal, so keeps us busy with the Flathead River Alliance. We attend board meetings and have a lot of joint meetings together. We actually have done some floater surveys together. We try to do some interagency floating together. We're working together on the comprehensive river management plan. And of course, we've done some University of Montana floater monitoring that we're continuing to do. So those are just some of the examples of cooperation between us. Like, I am finished right now, and I'd like to introduce MJ Crandall, my very knowledgeable colleague from the U.S. Forest Service.
Thanks, Brad. Yeah, so and thanks everyone for being on this call. This next portion is an attempt on my part to kind of to bring some of the principles that Jimmy talked about down to what those principles look like in an actual plan. And so my thought was I'd go through an example plan and show you some bits and pieces out of it, and hopefully show you sort of the thread between the river values that Jimmy talked about, the thread between those values and then management actions or potential management actions that the plan gives us guidance for. And so the example CRMP that I chose for this talk is the Middle Fork, Snoqualmie, and Pratt Wild and Scenic Rivers plan. And I chose this because this is a baby Wild and Scenic River. It was just enacted in 2015. This is a baby CRMP. The draft decision notice went out in 2021. This is also a kind of a much simpler plan than the current and future Three Forks of the Flathead Wild and Scenic River management plans. So it allows us to kind of cover in a sort of shorter period of time elements that I think will be important that are important for you all to look at, and can be helpful if you're engaging in the CRMP process as we move forward, and hopefully you'll find some value out of this. And then the final reason why I chose this one, this particular river, is that I grew up where this river is at, in the Seattle area, so it's very familiar to me. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So just to get your bearings on the Middle Fork and Pratt. So these are rivers that are just outside of Seattle. They flow into the Puget Sound and are directly, there's a direct line from Seattle to these rivers on many lanes of the Interstate 90. So a rather urban landscape. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is the table of contents from this plan, which kind of shows kind of graphically how a bit of the thread between those values and two management actions. And so at the top, the high level stuff, the plan identifies in detail the Wild and Scenic Rivers values mantra, the free flowing, water quality, and ORVs. And then it moves to a little more specificity on what those values and how we might protect them in the desired river conditions. And these desired river conditions are statements that are similar to what you might find in a desired conditions in a forest plan, if that's something you're familiar with. But essentially, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a statement on what conditions are desirable based on the values that were identified above. And then finally, there's the plan moves into specific visitor use or specific management, visitor use management, and other forms of management, and the capacity. And all of that is informed by the desired river conditions, which are informed by the Wild and Scenic River values mantra. So we can go to the next slide. So what I'm doing here, and I'm going to take one thread looking at the recreation values in this plan, and take that through to from the values themselves to the desired river conditions to management actions. So the recreation values are identified in it, and this is an ORV, so outstanding remarkable value. And each of the outstanding remarkable values are unique to that specific river. And those are identified typically in an ORV assessment. So there's a process to identify those. And this statement sort of covers what this means for the middle fork of the Snoqualmie. That there's outstanding opportunities for catch and release fishing year round. There's exceptional beginner level whitewater opportunities in this area. And the low elevation really allows for year-round recreational access, which is unique for rivers in this area. So those are and part of that is there's accessibility by a paved road into a lot of this year-round. Go to the next slide. So how does that inform desired river conditions? So we have this recreational value, these recreational values. How do we, what's our desire? What's a little bit more detail about what we need to, what exactly that we're trying to protect? And these desired river conditions are really important. They form kind of the core of the rest of the plan, because everything else, as you're writing the plan, as we're using this plan, everything kind of flows back to these desired river conditions. So these can kind of seem like flowery statements, or kind of they can be sort of seem kind of innocuous, but as you're reviewing a plan, especially if you're wanting to bring comments in a NEPA process about a plan, these desired river conditions statements are really important to pay attention to. So I wanted to highlight something, one thing in this particular statement, that they're looking to their desire for the middle fork is that it would provide a gradient of visitor experiences from a very developed experience at the end of the river, and then as you move up the river, you would get a more primitive backcountry and more wilderness setting. The sights and sounds would be most evident of humans would be most evident at the developed recreation sites at the lower end downstream, and then moving up into much less up above. And I thought this concept of a gradient was really interesting, and really fits this river, because it really does slowly, as you move up this corridor, becomes more and more difficult, really, even just mile by mile. It's a slow transition from highly developed to less developed. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is just a picture of the wilderness area at the headwaters. This picture was taken by Alex Weinberg, and just wanted to give you a sense of what this river looks like in the most wild place. Go ahead, next slide. So, based on the desired river conditions, we want to be able to monitor what exactly is happening and whether we're achieving these desired conditions. So the plan identifies indicators that help land managers and the public understand how we're doing in our efforts to keep to protect those river values. And then based on those indicators and other factors, we are also required in a management plan to establish a capacity. And in this particular CRMP, they established a capacity range. And there's usually a whole set of analysis that establishes what that number is, to really think deeply about how many people can use this corridor and still be able to protect these values. Go to the next slide. So that all flows into a monitoring and management strategy. So now we're getting more and more specific how we're going to protect these values. And this section, when we get to it, it guides ongoing monitoring and visitor use impacts to the values, and indicates potential management responses when thresholds within those indicators, when we're hitting marks that are indicating that values are threatened. Next slide. So one indicator, an example from this CRMP is wilderness campsite condition scores. So there's a particular protocol that this forest has been using for a while, so we have some history on this, and then we'd be able to monitor those, and when they reach certain scores or aggregate scores, then that indicates a need to change our management in some way. Next slide, please. Now, what are those management actions? Well, a CRMP doesn't necessarily prescribe specific things that we must do in order to respond to threats, but it provides a range of potential management actions, and that allows managers to respond to the particular situation that's at hand and be able to balance a range of different factors that may be very peculiar to what's happening on the ground at that time. But you can see on the potential management responses here, there's a whole range of different things that are from ones that are not very invasive at all, to the status quo, to ones that may change a lot in what's happening on the ground. So things like information at trailheads, and increased wilderness ranger contacts. Those are pretty simple things to do, provided you have the resources. But if those things aren't working, then land managers may have the opportunity, or they have maybe looking at more invasive opportunities, but wouldn't necessarily be jumping to the end of this list right away. Would be looking at opportunities to try to protect values in the least invasive ways possible. Next slide. All right, that was the end. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, MJ. So what we're going to do is set aside some time for Q&A. If you can drop those in the Q&A box, and then I'll try to pull the ones that can be answered. So our agency partners, they're not able to share what is in the current draft. They're able to do that when it comes out for public comment, but you can ask about mechanisms or if really anything involving CRMPs that maybe would help you have a better understanding of the best way possible to respond when the draft comes out for public comment. So it looks like there's a question about Jimmy referenced the policy to enhance the river values, a policy that means status quo is not meeting the standard. Can he talk further about that directive?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. Thanks for asking it. Hey, so I know a lot of us in this also work in wilderness, and so it's a great contrast, right? The Wilderness Act, we often refer to the mandate to preserve wilderness character. And so the Wild and Scenic River Act uses protect and enhance, which kind of gives a more affirmative order to do something when we can. And so with that, it specifically refers to the river values, right? And so I will admit I haven't been involved in any direct enhancement projects myself, but what comes to mind is if a river is designated because of maybe a specific fish, so a fish species adds value to that river, we might look at ways to enhance the habitat for that fish species, for example. And so that's kind of a more proactive approach to taking management action. And then we could go down a whole thread of thinking about untrammeled in wilderness, but I'm not going to go there. But anyway, hopefully that answers your question, Bill.
So Amy asked, will climate change be in this CRMP for the Three Forks? And maybe I guess another question would be to play off that one is, are you seeing, especially this newest CRMP that you showed an example of, is that something they took into account? Are you seeing more CRMPs that are rolling out that include that?
I think MJ shared that other plan, so I'm not sure what's in there. I will say that we have a few plans that are they're dipping their toe, so to speak, in how would we address climate change in a CRMP, and sitting where I sit in the regional office and looking at where you all with your planning versus other rivers, I think you're kind of down the road a ways to kind of add that on now. That wouldn't be my decision, but I think the other rivers that are looking at are rivers that are like really just starting to think about their CRMP.
Thank you. So we had some questions that were also submitted by email. We have people that had registered and wanted questions to be answered that just couldn't make it tonight. We received a question about how are wild and scenic river systems managed for cultural resources, including sites that are culturally significant to Indigenous peoples? I wonder if maybe that's would that be a Brad question?
I can take a stab at it. I'm not a cultural resources.
Right, yeah.
But, the park itself, we manage cultural resources to try to preserve them for the future. And it's my understanding the forest would do the same. So those are values, if they're identified as an ORV, especially, we are mandated to protect them and enhance them. And so if there's any sorts of, well, I think from this plan, eventually we'll have to consult with tribal nations that are near this area to exactly tell them what our plan will be and let them have comment on it. And so, but in the grand scheme of things, we very much want to preserve those cultural resources and allow for cultural practices to continue into the future.
Thank you. We have a question from Scott. How rigorous are the water quality monitoring requirements on wild and scenic designated rivers? And how often does the managing agency monitor the water quality, if you happen to know the frequency?
So, and I think Scott probably knows this as well. I think it probably depends on the river system. For one thing, again, we talked about the CRMP should address what monitoring we're going to commit to over the long term. I think there are plenty of rivers where there may or may not be huge concerns, and we probably, in those cases, defer to whatever state water quality monitoring is going on, or if there is a concern that arises that drives us to do something that wasn't identified originally in this CRMP.
Thank you. And then we have a question from Michael. Are there any protections that extend beyond the wild and scenic corridor that would allow similar management techniques to be extended to the tributaries of the Flathead? So I don't know if maybe that would be bringing up the current forest plan, if that addresses those tributaries that fall outside of the corridor.
I can take a stab at that from the Park Service side. It's unfortunately, it would be a big effort, but we have never, I believe, evaluated like some of the streams and rivers in Glacier for Wild and Scenic River status. Just off the top of my head, the Belly River, maybe Nyack Creek, maybe McDonald Creek could possibly have outstandingly remarkable values. I do believe we, you know, as both agencies, we definitely look at what can flow into the Flathead and could affect ORVs. And so that comes to our forefront. And we're very careful about what management decision we make that would affect, even if it's downstream into the Flathead. But yeah, I'm probably not going to be able to work long enough in my career, but it's something I would really have loved to have done is to go and evaluate our Glacier Park and all the variety of streams we have for Wild and Scenic River status.
Perfect. So I'm going to try to we're quickly closing on time to switch to Chris, who would talk about the local efforts on the Three Forks CRMP. So I think I'll have one or two more questions here. Emily, how do TMDLs influence your management and monitoring of wild and scenic rivers, if at all? So as far as the water quality monitoring, maybe what triggers would that be? Or are there?
I'm not sure I totally understand that question. So maybe that's why we're all being quiet.
Oh, no, it's okay. So maybe I'll try to rephrase it. I think how she's asking. So looking at water quality that will be in the CRMP or just in any CRMP, what would happen if they were triggered? What steps would go into play? And we can come back to that. Yeah.
You know, I think we often defer to it depends, right? It's going to depend on what is causing the issue and how we would address it and what authority we have as an agency to address it. Sometimes things happen in the river corridor that we can highlight the effects, but we don't always have the authority to take the action. We have the responsibility to make sure it's known. But yeah, I think it's going to depend.
Okay, I'll just do one last one and feel free to keep adding questions in like the first webinar. We'll wrap back and try to include that in an FAQ sort of thing. I'm going to try to summarize, I think Joe's the best I can. I think maybe one of the questions he's asking is as far as private versus commercial and not putting them against each other, but how is that tracked in CRMPs? And maybe we'll start with that and I'll try to digest this a little more. And y'all did talk about some monitoring. So the river rangers do monitoring. There's some video counts. Yeah, I'm just trying to do my best on this. I don't
So,
know. Yeah.
So the CRMPs will often will identify the desired sort of allocation of use in particular management units. So whether that would be that commercial use would take up a large percentage of that, or of the total use, or a small, and not that all would flow from the desired conditions, the values that you're trying to protect, and then so it could be significantly different from management unit to management unit, but that is something that's identified in the plan.
Okay, thank you. So I'll take notes on the other questions that have been posed or are added. So we'll go ahead and transition to Chris.
If I can get myself unmuted. Hey, thanks, Sheena. So yeah, I just want to, a lot of the questions, especially that last question, is kind of hitting on how are we working with the data we have. And, first and foremost, I just want to thank everyone for hanging in and attending this presentation. It's a lot of detail about Wild and Scenic River management and CRMPs, and it's great to know that folks still are engaged and wanting to understand what the agencies are doing as we manage these rivers. And I want to highlight, as we look at the Flathead plan, where we are is highlight where we've come from and the resources that we have available. It probably won't answer all of the questions that you guys have, but hopefully it will help give you some more context. And, I know there's a lot of folks who are attending this that attended a bunch of our meetings. There's probably some new folks who haven't. But yeah, just really wanting to highlight, as we began to work here, we spent a lot of time working, with the public and with our partners, the Park Service, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and other agencies to try to convey what it is that we do in managing these river systems. And, you had a pretty good overview on what goes into a plan from folks today as we try to, protect and enhance the values through which the river is designated. For the Flathead, one of the most important things for us to remind, and even to this day, is, we still do have a plan. We have a river management plan that was it was written in the 80s, and we have a rec management plan that was put out in 86, but we still have a plan. And there's the documents in the corner of the slide here are still relevant documents. Obviously, we identified a need to update them. There's a lot of relevant information in there. So, back on that last slide real quick, Sheena, I just wanted to highlight some of the info on the ORVs, and folks, spending some time going back and looking at our website, Forest Service website. We have links to all of the public meetings that we had, and a lot of really great presentations that dive into some of the water quality monitoring that we're doing, wildlife monitoring. So each one of the topics on the page has those presentations cached, and it's worth spending some time on. As we talk about where we are now, our proposed action document, which is also on the web page, is still our last document that we're working off of with you all as the public and folks engaging. We held those 2 public meetings with a lot of 180 people attending at Flathead Valley Community College, and we had a lot of great comments come out of that. So I encourage folks to spend some time looking at those if you haven't. You go to the next slide now. So moving forward, where we are, as folks know who have engaged with us, we took a pause and from the fall of 2020 through the fall of 21. So we are back working on this project where we're still working with Hydro Solutions as a contractor on our draft plan and analysis. Obviously working with the Park Service and Forest Service team as we even today move forward and try to work with the information that we had. We obviously had, as we review edits and work on our draft, we've had changed conditions, right? You all saw that, especially around capacity and use over the last couple of years in the Flathead Valley on the river system. A lot more users, a lot of new users. So it's high complexity with this plan for us to work through. The desired conditions we release to the public, and then obviously the capacity that we have to come up with, and looking at our visitor management and what we are doing right and what we need to be taking into account. So it's a lot of information, it's a lot of complexity, but we are working hard on it. And timeline, we are working on that as we go. Obviously, we identified April, I think in the fall is when we were going to go out to the public with the draft plan and EA. As it stands, our goal right now is midsummer to get that plan out, and that would obviously trigger more a public comment period, public meetings and engagement for folks to get back up to speed and give us some comments on the plan that we put out. So that is where we are as it stands now. And we've had a lot of changes, as we said, in the use and demographics of the area. We've had a lot of changes in our forest and park leadership. So it's given us some time to spend a little bit more effort looking at where we came from and where we're going. I know there's a lot of folks who are really wanting to see us move this forward. And I just want to let folks know we are. Stay engaged is what we're looking for, obviously, and appreciate FRA helping to boost and get more folks engaged and work with us. And we're thankful for the public and who wants and is looking for us to get this plan out and give us some more input. It's a collaborative effort, and we're definitely wanting to get as much input as we can going forward. As for folks staying updated, obviously continue to reach out to the forest and to the park, district staff, forest staff, if you have questions or comments. And then we do have our email list. If those of you signed up back in when we were really running on the planning on the webpage, if you signed up for a mailing list, we still have you. If you're new to our efforts and you haven't, you can sign up via email through our webpage. There's a block on the CRMP page at the bottom where you can put in your email address. And you can always email one of us too if you want to be added to that. So just appreciate everyone staying engaged and attending tonight. And thanks, Sheena, and thanks for the presentation for all the great folks here. Sheena, back to you.
I was muted. Thank you so much to our presenters and of course the community members that have shown up for this. It really shows that you care deeply about the Three Forks of the Flathead and that you're interested in staying engaged as a stakeholder. We have a couple events coming up. April 12th is our River Ambassador training, and April 14th is our River Recreation Citizen Scientist training. Those are both at Glacier Outdoor Center. And then we have a April 26th Community Benefit Day at Backslope Brewing. Those are just a couple events we have coming up. I did want to provide our contact information. I have 2 pages of questions that we've received since the first webinar and then leading up to this one. So I work quite closely with Glacier National Park and Flathead National Forest river managers to answer as many as we could. Those answers, so the FAQs, they can be located on our flatheadrivers.org website under resources, and there's a comprehensive river management plan page. So that'll have the FAQs. Chris and partners have provided multiple links to existing documents that you can reference. So that's a really great opportunity to look at resources. we just wanted to say, once again, thank you. FRA is really dedicated to the Three Forks of the Flathead and ensuring that the outstanding remarkable values are enhanced and protected, and that the river is ensured access and enjoyment for all. So we hope you can join us. We're exploring doing an on-river speaker series this summer. So as that develops, we'll let you know.